Good, but then I would say we start. First of all, thank you for coming through the Dubai rush hour traffic. We know that is always a challenge, especially now we have the post Ramadan traffic hitting us again. And big thanks to Rob for coming over and spending some time with us. And we had a few questions from you already, and we had a few questions noted down. So I think that we'll let Rob share a little bit about the story and the history, and how did you get to where we are today with Factor. And then we'll open, of course, a little bit more for some questions afterwards, if there's anything you want to ask, because we want to have a little bit of dialogue. I'm sure that there's a few interesting things to hear about. And I'll do a short intro, because if you haven't met me before, my name is Volker. I'm in the UAE since 6 weeks, but I've lived here before, and I'm the new head of retail operations for Wolfi's. So I support Clinton, who's hiding somewhere around the corner, our GM. And so I'm very happy that I finally are joining the team here, and so this is my first time being on the stage here in front of you guys. And I have with me Wesley.
Yeah, cool. No, thank you everybody for coming through, and to come and have the discussion with Rob and get the whole story behind Factor. Obviously very, very cool brand. And for those of you who don't know me, I've been with Wolfi's for about 6 years. Always was started in my career here at the shop in Dubai, but now I look after all of the operations in all of our stores in Abu Dhabi, which is where Rob will be tomorrow. So we'll do a bit of a ride and meet and greet there as well. Looking forward to hearing your story, and any questions and feedback is obviously always appreciated. So thank you so much.
Good to hear.
Not a big fan of microphones. Thanks everybody. This is my first time in Dubai. It's been a really nice experience. Gotten out cycling quite a bit, enjoyed some sun, got a sunburn. It's going really well. So give you a little bit of background on myself. So I've been in the bicycle industry nearly 30 years. I was a bike rider before that. I moved, as soon as I stopped riding bikes, I moved to Taiwan in 1996, and I got a job at the very first carbon fiber factory in Asia that was producing golf club shafts and tennis rackets. And they wanted to start a bicycle division, and they had gotten in contact with me saying, hey, we know you're an engineer, you're a bike rider, would you be interested in doing this? And keep in mind, this is way before Google and the internet and all of that good stuff. And I was like, sure, I could do it. And I had no idea what I was doing. And at the time, the only bikes made in carbon fiber were from a US company called Kestrel and from Look in France. And it was both very small productions. But I took this job there, and the first thing I did is I went and I worked with Look doing a technology transfer of helping them have their bikes produced in this factory, which was called Advanced Composites in Taiwan, and learned a lot from Look, and then just kind of took the technology that we got from Look and then just continued to evolve it forward. And I worked there for a couple of years, and then I decided to start my own company, which was called Precision Manufacture Group. And Precision Manufacture Group, the idea was, the high-end bicycle had not yet arrived in Taiwan, but I kind of felt like it was coming, and I felt like, I was kind of part of, sort of the history of what was to come. And so in a couple of years earlier when I was working for Advance, it was kind of funny. I got a phone call from 2 guys in Canada, and they were like, hey, could you tell us a little bit about, what it would take to make a carbon fiber bike with you? And I went through the whole thing with them, and they were like, it's a little too expensive for us. We're not quite ready to do that now, but, let's keep in touch. And so when I opened my own company, I got back in touch with these guys, and I'm like, hey, are you ready to start making carbon fiber bikes? And they were like, yeah, now is a good time. And that happened to be Phil White and Gerard Broman, the founders of Cervelo. And so I was very lucky that I got to work with Cervelo basically from the inception of that brand all the way through the time that it was sold. And there was a point where I got to, I had a factory in China, a factory in Taiwan, had about 3,000 employees. And I was producing bikes for Trek, for Cervelo, obviously. I was making all of Santa Cruz's mountain bikes. I was making BH. I was making all of the Envy products. I was making a lot of Zip products. I know you always hear about they're made in the USA. Don't believe everything you hear. And so I was building bikes for lots and lots of different brands, and I had a very nice manufacturing business. But slowly the landscape started to change. These bigger companies were coming and they were buying up brands and they were consolidating them. You know, SRAM came and they bought Zip from the original entrepreneur founder. And then all of a sudden, they wanted to bring the manufacturing in-house because they're SRAM. That makes sense. And then Pon came along, and then Pon bought Cervelo, Focus, and Santa Cruz, my 3 biggest customers. And they decided, well, we're going to move to lower cost manufacturing in a different part of Asia. And so at that point, I decided, well, this is going to become an ongoing thing. I should either stop working or I should perhaps do my own brand. And so I started the brand Black Ink, which is our wheel and componentry brand. And I kind of came up with that name by myself. And then for a bike, I was looking at, well, I wanted to do bikes as well. And I was looking at a lot of like historical Italian brands that maybe weren't used anymore. I spoke to the owner of Tomasini. I spoke to the owner of Rossini. I don't know if you all have been riding bikes long enough to know some of these brands, but they're quite historical. But they've kind of not really been taken care of over the years. But then it was kind of interesting to me. I remembered this company in the UK that I worked with, together with Aston Martin, producing a bike that was sold together with the Aston Martin 177, and it was called the Factor 001. And they only produced about 60 bikes. They were very, very special. They cost 40,000 pounds, back when the pound was almost $2 US. So it was an $80,000 bike. And it was a very special bike. And so I got back in touch with Aston Martin first, and I said, would you be open to me buying the trademarks and brand? And we talked a little bit, and they're like, yeah, that's actually pretty cool because, it's a bit of a homecoming. We know, what you would do with it, and that you would probably give this brand, the attention that it deserves because, they were never very interested in being in the bicycle business. And so I bought Factor from Aston Martin, and I spent about a year and a half coming up with a product range. And before I ever sold a bike, I sponsored AG Desert, the Tour de France team from France. And we got 3rd place at the Tour de France with Romain Bardet, and I still hadn't sold a bike yet. And it was, very significant that all of a sudden, here's this new brand at the Tour de France. We had to pay a very significant amount of money to be there. It was almost €2 million per year to have this contract with the team. But I knew that this was the right way forward to really, if I'm going to have a brand, to really kind of supercharge it. And so we got 3rd at the Tour, hadn't sold a bike yet. We got 2nd at Paris-Roubaix the next year, still hadn't sold too many bikes. What I didn't realize in starting a brand or having a brand was I knew that I could make a really cool product. I knew that we obviously had the factory to back us up. I had no idea about the sales channel, and that took a lot longer than I expected. I remember actually speaking to Wolfi pretty early on. Everybody's like, "Hey, you want to sell bikes in Dubai? You need to be with Wolfi." And I contacted him, and he's like, "Who? What? No, thank you." Thankfully, a couple years passed. We became a little better known. We've introduced some amazing models, whether it be Tour Magazine or Cycling News or I forget some of the others that do third-party aerodynamic testing. Our bikes have been winning every test that has been done in the past year, which is really quite gratifying to our engineering team. Factor is spread all over the world at the moment. I live in Taiwan because I follow the production. Our engineering group is in Canada. Ironically, they all worked for Cervelo in the past. And so when Cervelo decided they were going to become an American company, a lot of their engineering group didn't want to move to America. And so I was very lucky that I already knew them quite well, and I was able to get who I thought were their best engineers to open an office for Factor in Canada. We have offices in Girona, Spain, which is where we manage our European business from. And we have offices in Boulder, Colorado. So I'm pretty lucky. I chose some really nice places that when I have to work, I get to go visit and ride my bike, which I highly recommend if you start your own bike company to keep that in mind. Fast forward to where we are today. I don't do contract manufacturing anymore. I stopped doing that. I started Factor 8 years ago, and then I slowly let all the contract manufacturing sort of run its course, meaning that I kept making bikes for others, but I didn't take any new projects. And usually a project will run 2, 3, 4 years. And so all of the bikes that I were making are all now obsolete for those brands, and I didn't take any new business. And so we're solely focused on Factor. We have about 100 people working at our factory in Taiwan. All of our bikes are made in Taiwan in our own factory. That's really something different from almost every other brand in the bike industry. Almost everyone buys their bikes from third-party manufacturers like I used to be. And so if you think that our rims, our hubs, our handlebar, our stem, our seat post, our frames, everything on the bike except the tires, the saddle, and the group set is actually made by Factor. No one else can say that. Even Giant, who does their own carbon manufacturing, doesn't make their own carbon wheels. And so it really separates us from all of our competitors. And it allows us to be a lot more nimble. And it allows us to really do what we want to do. And then I'll give it one last sort of antidote. Back when I was doing contract manufacturing, I was working with Cervelo, and I was working on, and I hate to say it because it's one of the brands you sell, but we were working on, it was called the R5 at the time. And R5 was a really nice bike, but I went to them, I'm like, for $45, $50 more, it could be even better, a lot better. And they were like, no, we can't afford $50 more because then we'd have to charge $300, $400 more. I don't remember what the number was. And I'm like, well, that's kind of crazy. Don't you want to make the best bike you can? And they were like, we want to make the best bike for this price. And they were unwilling to make a better bike. And so when I started Factor, I was like, I make the best bike, period. I don't question how much the material costs, how much the labor costs, how much the painting costs. I focus on making the best bike. And I put that $50 or more into all of our bikes. Because I own the factory, I don't necessarily have to pass that price through to our customers. And so when you look at our bikes, they're actually priced very competitively with a Cervelo, a Specialized, Colnago. But I feel like we offer more value in our bikes. When you start to look at our bikes closely with the ceramic speed bottom brackets and the ceramic speed headsets and the ceramic speed bearings in all of our wheels, we really go that extra distance that no one else does because we own the factory and we use the factory not to make a profit. We use it as a pass-through. So for us, it's just another process in our business. And so I really hope that, if you get a chance to ride a Factor, you'll definitely feel why and how it's different. And a lot of times, that's all it takes is someone to try our bike to buy our bike. And we're really proud of that.
Cool. Maybe we can shoot into some Q&A a little bit. So just about the journey and brand philosophy, obviously you've mentioned a couple of points on here already. But one question is, why do you think Factor succeeded where other brands struggled in recent years? And could we compare the trajectory of Factor bikes to Colnago?
Well, it was funny. I don't know, as everyone walked in today, you probably saw, I was actually chatting with the head of engineering at Colnago. And we were saying that there's probably two bikes that are doing well at the moment. One is Colnago and one is Factor. Colnago obviously has a much longer history than Factor, but I think they're developing very interesting products, as are we. And so I think that we're both staying very true and very genuine to what we started. In their case, what they started 60 years ago. In my case, what I started 8 years ago. And I think that it's really important to stay genuine. And I think it's really important to not confuse the customer. I think coming out of COVID, a lot of bicycle companies have had a lot of difficulty with overstock and with challenges around not having exactly the right bikes, and there's been a lot of discounting going on. We don't ever discount our bikes. I'm pretty sure Colnago doesn't ever discount their bikes. And I think that everyone knows, okay, this is how much it's going to cost. And there's really like no confusion around, so what's really the cost? What's really the price? And I like to, I think there was a great interview with one of the members of the Hermès family, where he didn't say, he explained Hermès is costly, it's not expensive. And what that means is costly, you're paying for something that is well made, something that you can appreciate for a lifetime. Expensive is something that you paid a lot of money for that you're probably going to be disappointed in. And we definitely like to think of our bikes as costly and not expensive.
When we think back to the past 2, 3, 5 years, what happened when it comes to innovation and changes in cycling, I think we've seen, of course, electronic gears become almost a standard on most good road bikes, and we've seen the disc brakes being now a standard. What do you see is maybe something that is coming next? Where do you see the trends that are coming into cycling going forward?
I think that's a pretty difficult one. I think I think that for the bikes themselves, carbon fiber, the engineering, the weights have kind of reached the bottom. Bikes aren't going to get any lighter than they are now. I think aerodynamically, we can still have bikes that are still more aero in the future than they are right now. And I would say that one of the very interesting things that a lot of people don't realize is brands like Colnago, brands like Trek or Factor, we do a lot of work with, it's called CFD, which is computational fluid dynamics, which is basically like a wind tunnel in a computer. And 5 years ago, the computing time to do this costs about $1 million a year because you needed basically a supercomputer. And then all of a sudden, companies like Amazon, Google came along, and you can outsource your computing time to them. And what used to cost $1 million a year now costs $1,000 a month. And so it's really enabled us to do a lot more with CFD now than we could have ever done in the past, because now we can actually afford all the computing time, and we can do hundreds or even thousands of different runs in CFD before we've ever made a carbon fiber bike. And so that's why we've really seen these big advances in aerodynamics, and we will continue to see more. And I'd say the other thing that's going to get interesting is I think we'll start to see more integration of lights, integration of crash detection, integration of radar sensors, things like that, because especially for me personally, I hate saying all of these things strapped onto our bikes. It really bothers me when I make this beautiful bike and then I see this ugly saddlebag or this light or this radar sensor all strapped on. So we're definitely looking at more integration of those products.
Factor as a brand, you guys have some very cool collaborations with luxury brands.
Not including that one.
Not including that one, all right. So we want to know, why did Factor decide to go in this direction? And do you think that luxury brands would become more involved in cycling?
I think as far as the collaborations go, I think a lot of inside of Factor, I like to think that we're a little more fashion forward than a lot of other bicycle companies. And we definitely see a lot of our customer base as being people that also appreciate other nice things outside of just cycling. And so it was kind of twofold. When I contacted Paul Smith, I just called up Paul Smith and I'm like, hi, this is Rob from Factor, can we talk? And he's like, yeah, I love Factor, come on over. And so I kind of like, wow, that it kind of gave me a feeling like, oh, this brand is now really, really part of mainstream, cycling. And so I felt like that was important and very cool, and doing the collab with Paul Smith was great. And so I think that we're trying to bring, whether it be Paul Smith in fashion or some auto industry partners, or even skate brands, for example, into cycling, just trying to give it a little more edge, and just try to bring more people into the sport that maybe haven't necessarily looked at cycling as being cool. But especially in Asia where I live, cycling is very, very fashion driven. People will have 6 helmets to match the whatever kit they're wearing that day. When I was a bike rider a long time ago, I had 1 helmet and that was it. But now it's really become a fashion forward sport. And so if we can bring the Louis Vuittons or Bugattis into our sport, why shouldn't we?
You've already touched a little bit the community aspect, and I think we've seen great example also today in the morning where we were like 30, 40 riders in Maidan riding around the track. How would you describe the typical factor rider? Is there a stereotype that you get to hear often? Because there's like different brands have different stereotypes. So what is the typical factor rider in your opinion?
I should have read that one in advance. That's a typical question to answer. I think we look at it as we have 2 different customers. We have the aspirational customer. We know that our bikes are a little more exclusive than some. And so we have people that love cycling and they have to save for a year to get a new bike and they choose a factor. And then obviously we have someone, I met several people today who have multiple factors. And for them, it's a different experience. But I think that our customer is all the same in that they're really kind of a connoisseur of bicycles. And they understand that our marketing is genuine. When we talk about aerodynamics, when we talk about manufacturing, when we talk about who we are, that it's not made up and that it's not bullshit. I think there's a lot of bullshit in the bicycle world, especially in the marketing. A lot of people are saying, things that are simply not true. And I'm always very quick to point it out. And I don't, sometimes I make some enemies in doing so, but I never get challenged on it because what I'm saying is also true. And so while I'll call people out, I never get it coming back to me.
Thanks.
Cool, thank you. What role does performance culture play in product and brand decisions?
I would say everything. I think that our DNA at Factor is performance cycling and bike racing. In our company, almost everyone rides. We have several former professionals working in Factor. Most recently, David Miller has joined Factor as our brand director. For those of you who don't know David Miller, he has 23 Grand Tour stage wins, former world champion, time trialist. A little bit of a checkered past, but who doesn't from those days? Just being real. And so when we design bikes, these are the bikes that we want to ride. These are the bikes that we want to perform. We want to always give that feeling of exhilaration of every time that you ride a Factor, it's like driving a sports car.
One of the most common questions that we of course get is of course what's coming new? What is the things that you maybe look forward to developing in the next 12 months, 2 years when it comes to Factor?
Currently, our product range is pretty complete. We make triathlon bikes, we make time trial bikes, we make racing bikes. We have some mountain bikes, although we're kind of taking a break from that, and we have gravel. So we're kind of like looking at all drop bar segments of the market. We develop normally 3 new products every year. Last year, because of the Olympics and working with the Australian team, that took almost all of our engineering resources, and so we weren't really able to develop too many bikes last year. But we did break the world record and get a gold medal in Paris, so it kind of made it worthwhile. This year, we are releasing 3 new bikes. What I can say is one is a racing bike, another is a more aero-driven bike, and then a gravel bike as well. And so it's a pretty busy year for us. The next launch will be in this month with a couple other launches going on. But I think if you start to look at our product range and then you look at how we replace bikes, you can start to kind of figure out where we're going based off of something disappearing. Well, something has to come replace it before long. So.
Thank you. Maybe now we can open up some of the floor to anyone who's maybe got some questions at this stage. Yeah, sure. Welcome.
Thank you. Hi, Rob. Maybe building a little bit on what Volker asked about what's next. So if you would be developing, you're obviously within the limitations of UCI rules.
Yes.
What is the one rule you would like to get rid of to make the bike that you want to make?
I actually like the UCI rules because I like that there's a constraint. Just like in Formula One, you make the fastest bike you can within the constraint. I think when the UCI took away the 3-to-1 limit a couple of years ago, that was very helpful. We were able to make bikes that were aerodynamically quite a bit faster with them taking off that. I think I'd like them to take the weight limit away, but I would like them to do testing around safety to make sure that, okay, the weight limit is taken off, but everything still needs to pass ISO standardized testing. And in so doing, we could actually take the weight out of the bikes a bit more. I think that would be the only thing I would really look at them. And then perhaps sometimes I would say that we introduce designs to them, like our track bike design that we had in the Olympics last year, that we actually had to get some legal opinions on because it's a rule interpretation a lot of the times. And so they provide the rules, you interpret them, and then you create a product. And sometimes they might say, well, we have a different interpretation of that same rule. You'll see on that track bike that we made for the Australian team that we put the seat post outside of the bike. And by putting the seat post outside of the bike, it actually created a 16-centimeter airfoil towards the rear of the bike. And they were like, we don't know. And we had to bring in lawyers, and and according to their rules, that is legal. I guarantee you, every company now is going to do exactly the same thing on their next TT bike. Now that we got away with that.
Thank you.